By attending or participating in this event, you are giving your consent to be photographed and or video recorded. And you are waiving any and all claims regarding the use of your image by Kogod School of Business. The Kogod School of Business, at its discretion, may provide a copy of photos upon written request. And without further ado, we'll proceed with our program.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. And Tom Rath, welcome to Kogod School of Business at American University. Thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here with your group.
So Perry Hooks of Hook Book Events that has made you available to us tells me you're a bit familiar with American University. How so?
You know, I've spent a lot of time at AU over the last few years, and especially as we were working on a program called Eat, Move, Sleep, and a documentary entitled Fully Charged that really looked at how we could help leaders and students and communities to pump a lot more real physical energy into their daily routine and workplace. I think, you know, one of the things I've spent the last 10 plus years of my career working on most intensively is how do we help make people better through the organizations that they choose to be a part of, when kind of the inverse has been true in an industrial model for many, many decades.
Well, it's so true. And I think that people say yes more often than they can really take on all of the responsibilities. There's a discipline in saying no. But in terms of your books, let's talk a little bit about strengths. It has been part of the backbone of the Kogod experience. All of our students go through something called Business Professionalism 101, and they go through a strengths assessment. And it's been just a wonderful experience to help build a program using that as the solid structure, and then talking about the different aspects. So everybody gets up, they share their top 5. We talk about them, split them up into groups where we have them homogenous, or we have them with people who are complete opposites. It's always been a fascinating experience and great exercises.
You know, it's wonderful to hear, Jim, because I think one of the things I realized early on in a lot of the work that I've been a part of is what I would call remediation focused approach starts at a pretty young age, and it starts in education. So of all the projects I've been involved with, the first thing I worked on at Gallup maybe 15, 20 years ago was program called Strengths Quest that was all about helping freshmen in college identify how they could turn that mindset around and say, how can I double down in the areas where I have the most talent and start to build things around that? Because what I learned from that work really early on is if you spend your life trying to be a little bit good at everything, it's really hard to be great at anything. So we've got to think differently about the way we invest our time. And I can't imagine a better point in an educational process or career to do it.
Well, I will tell you that a big hurdle that we have to overcome in that class each semester is when we start to talk to them about, we're not talking about your weaknesses, we're talking about your strengths. And to make more of your strengths instead of spending all of this time and energy trying to overcome your weaknesses. There's a reason to spend time on your weaknesses, but let's focus on the strengths. And I think your books, plural, make compelling cases to do just that.
You know, it's tough when you talk about that fundamental level. There's kind of a gravity there where I have kids who are 9 and 11 in the Arlington schools here normally, hopefully soon. And, you know, when they come back and you're looking at a report card, I think almost any parent, your gut instinct is to say, well, what's going on in the area where you're getting a C or we have a B minus or whatever it might be. And you almost forget to focus time on and praise and double down on the A's and so forth. And so, I mean, that seems like that's kind of a lifelong process where eventually in your life and career, hopefully you can get to the point where you can spend even more time in areas where things do come naturally. You do experience that state that a mentor of mine, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, calls flow, where you're really in your element and doing more of what you do best each day. But that's a day-by-day process. It's not something that happens overnight, obviously.
So we are going to talk about the new book. If you haven't seen it there in the audience, it's called Life's Great Question. I want to share a little bit of your background and ask you to share it, but Clifton Strengths, people may not be as familiar with the Clifton name. They may not be familiar, but they're certainly familiar with Gallup. And Gallup organization has been around for a very long time. It does worldwide surveys. It does an incredible amount of polling and surveys and on every aspect under the sun. And you're not only related, but you've been involved for many years. And all of the research that you've been able to draw from, in certain respects, comes through the Gallup work, or at least there's some affiliation there. Can you share us a little bit about the Clifton/Gallup relationship?
Oh, sure. Yeah. To me, when you talk about Gallup or some of the Clifton work, that was just a little tiny family business I grew up in. And so what started, my grandfather, Don Clifton, was a professor teaching psychology at the University of Nebraska. And he'd been a navigator in World War II, and he'd seen all that decimation and decided he wanted to kind of figure out how you build people up. And so I think it was 1969, he started his own company, left the university, and co-founded a company called SRI that was all about studying people and matching them to the right jobs. So you interview someone and say, do you have the right natural talents to be a good teacher? Or do you have the right natural talents to be a good salesperson? And those are often very different talent profiles he learned. And make a long story kind of short, that business that he started grew pretty quickly and acquired what's now known as the Gallup organization in the late 80s, I believe. And then when I graduated from college, 25 years ago now, I started working with Don on a project where the question we asked ourselves was, could you take all those interviews from literally thousands of different jobs and put together one common profile of essentially human talent to help people using, this was right when the internet was emerging, to say, could you match people's talents to better ideas and better things to do? And so those were the early iterations of StrengthsFinder and a lot of the campus-based programs. That work really started in colleges and with undergrads and freshmen in particular. And it's kind of a misnomer now because it's become so popular in the business world that it's a real business-focused thing. But a lot of our work there started off with college students and a few professors at Harvard and UCLA we were working with. And that's now started a conversation where I think 20 or 25 million kids have been able to learn about their strengths or people in the workplace. So it's been fun to see how that's played out over the years.
Well, and Strengths is the #1 nonfiction book sold on Amazon, which is an astounding fact. That's just, it speaks to the success and the hunger that people have for this information and the good guidance that you've provided over the years.
I appreciate that. And it's been fun to see how that's not only took off, but then had kind of a sustainable course where it wasn't just one of these flavor of the month things, but it started sustainable conversations on campuses and within friend groups and teams and social clubs on campuses and everything else. And, my hope is that before we started with a lot of this work, whenever a person had a conversation with a mentor or manager, you'd usually spend maybe 10, 20% of the time reviewing victories and talking about strengths, and then maybe 80% of the time on gaps and areas for improvement, and those types of things. And if a lot of conversations, that's just inverted basically, and you're spending 75% of the time on strengths, and you do need to talk about the 25% of things you need to work on or manage or blind spots and the like. If we can just turn the axis of that conversation a bit, that would, I think, make a difference in people's careers and well-being over time.
Well, I run a center called Business in the Capital out of the Kogod School of Business here in the Greater Washington region. I came from the Greater Washington Board of Trade and had a great relationship with the Gallup organization in Washington. I don't think that people realize how big a presence they actually have in the Greater Washington area and how they're involved in so many different things, not just Capitol Hill and the administration, but all across the board with businesses. We're very proud to have such a strong presence of Gallup here. And I think there are even more ways to get us at American University and Gallup closer together. They're here. We don't have to travel out to Nebraska.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of good opportunities there I think one of the most exciting things in the last 10 years Gallup spent a lot of time on, I've spent a lot of time on, is how do you kind of increase the overall tonnage of well-being in the world, in communities all over, and measure that and quantify it and prove that it makes a difference for the person and for the health of the organization overall. So I think there's a lot of big opportunity there, even in addition to the strengths conversation.
So we'll get right into it on the book. It builds on all of your prior work, and I'm curious about what drove you to write it.
What drove me to write it is pretty simple. At a base level, what I've realized from running into walls, quite frankly, with organizations and leaders over the last 10, 15 years, is that the default or average relationship between a person and the organization they work for is just broken. And on average, organizations have become very, very good. Now, I've been a part of this whole wave over the last 25 years of organizations are quite adept at measuring if they're getting enough discretionary effort out of you when you show up at work every day. And we've got that down to an absolute science now. Unfortunately, organizations don't know and certainly can't prove that you have more energy when you leave work than when you showed up in the morning. And they don't know if you're a better parent because you're involved with AU. And they don't know if I'm a better member of the community or I have less stress and more financial security because I spent 15 years working at Gallup or whatever it might be. But what I've seen is there are a few organizations who are finally starting to take on that task, and they want to know that people's lives and people's families are better off because they've chosen to be a part of that organization. And so the more I got involved with some author groups, and one author in particular, I've spent quite a bit of time with, a professor at Stanford, Jeffrey Pfeffer. He wrote a book almost 2 years ago now. He sent it to me and said, "What do you think of the title of this new book?" It wasn't out yet. And it was called Dying for a Paycheck. And I said to him, it's kind of a morbid title. I'm not sure if it'll sell very well, but it's a pretty good summary of the relationship between people and their organizations today. And sure enough, I think that book's been very influential and had an important impact in pulling together a lot of the research, because I think all of us as individuals and your students and staff, and as they're thinking about new jobs and entering the workforce, it's important to look for something that will make your life better off, make your health better, improve your family's life as well. One of the questions I'd really like to ask people all over the world is I'd like to ask their spouses or best friends or partners if they think that person's better off because of the organization they decided to be a part of. I think you'd get some really good measurement in there if you could start to look at questions like that.
So when people choose to come to school or move to the greater Washington region, I'm going to go without the benefit of a survey. I'm going to tell you that it's my experience they come here to make a difference. When they choose to come to American University, they're choosing American University in large part, the business school, School of International Service, and others, to make a difference, to be a change maker. It's actually the strategic plan of American University, led off by change makers. When you put this book together, I found it to be an assessment. I found it to be a guide, and very individualized. To do what?
Well, I think it's to spend more time doing what you do best for the sake of others, in short. But to also finish answering that earlier question, the second thing that inspired me to write this book was my favorite quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is when he said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" And at first I heard that question from Dr. King. It's one of those amazing things you see go around on Twitter on MLK Day or whatever. But as I started to process that and think about it more 2 or 3 years ago, what I found is it's a really good question to ask yourself every morning as you're going to school or going to work, to say, what am I going to do today that might just make a difference for someone tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now? Ideally, what can you work on this week for a few hours even that will continue to make a difference when you're gone? And so I think as you touched on, a lot of people come into DC with hope and optimism and mission and purpose. If they can say not only here's who I am and what my natural talents are, which is where we started this discussion today, but then quickly connect that, which is point A, to point B, which is what the world needs. I think it's at that intersection where you find a lot of the most happiness and enjoyment, meaning, and purpose in life, because no matter how passionate I am about something or how good I am at something, if it doesn't serve a purpose for another human being, I would argue it's not as valuable. And we've got to do a better job of making those connections between the two.
It's incredibly important, certainly in this time, in this town. And I think with the mindset that people have, you have a chapter now, it's chapter 2, right? At the beginning, you say, if I pay you to do something and you do it solely because I am paying you, that is not a partnership or a relationship. It's an economic transaction. Now, here you are in a town where the favorite question at bars and restaurants is, what do you do for a living? What do you do? Not the question that you harp on. In fact, you say that it's important to move from you are what you do to you are how you help. Does that capture it?
It does. And I was also kind of inspired by asking people that question in the DC area of what do you do, Jim? And If I ask that question at a normal dinner during normal times here, someone will say, I work for SAM, SHA, and all these acronyms. I need a translator sheet around here to ask people that question. So what I learned to do, because it's difficult to ask that question in this area in particular, is so, well, tell me what your normal day looks like. What do you spend your time on? Who are the people who look to you for guidance or that you serve? And I found that when you ask those questions, you really get a deeper and richer answer beneath the surface. So I was talking with a group of, as I was working on this book before it was published, I was talking to a group of students from Stanford who had read an early draft. And one of the young men raised his hand and said, oh, I get it. So basically, you're saying we need to move from you are what you do to you are how you help. And I think he captured that so succinctly that if we begin to orient our identity, the way we talk to people about what we do around what we do for others, it just focuses our energy in the right places each day. And it helps us to feel better about why we do what we do. Because if I were to ask someone and they say, oh, I'm a financial advisor at Bank of America or whatever it might be, that's so different from hearing someone talk about the way they help give families financial security so they can make it through challenging times like this. Just night and day different. So I think we've got to reimagine the way we describe what we spend our time doing in that regard.
I spent a number of years over at the American Institute of Architects, and our CEO was an architect, and he used to tell the story about the people at the cathedral and the bricklayers. And he said to the one guy, okay, well, what are you doing? The guy said, well, I'm building this wall and I'm laying about 1,000 bricks a day. He went to the next guy and said, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm working here and I'm putting the mortar together, and it's a backbreaking job, but it pays well. And he went to the third guy and he said, what are you doing? He says, I'm building the most majestic cathedral in the world, and it's to honor the Lord. And he just went on and on. And he said, that's the difference between working at a job and then pursuing not only your passion, but being rewarded through the good work that you do.
Right. We interviewed, there was a documentary that we actually premiered on the AU campus a couple of years ago called Fully Charged. And in that, we interviewed a researcher at Yale named Amy Wrzesniewski. And she's done some amazing work showing that even in hospitals, when you ask people who are cleaning hospital rooms how they describe their job, if you can get someone who has an answer like that about their putting smiles on people's faces and saving lives, and they identify with that, it's a whole different type of job and a whole different experience for them. So it's been fun to see how some of that even comes out in the more technical and objective research that I've looked at, where I think organizations probably need to do a better job of dedicating time to helping people make and see those connections. Because I work with a lot of people and have friends who are radiologists, for example. And when you look at studies of radiologists, there's been some academic work showing that if they're going through their day and they're just reading scans of people and going through one after the next, in comparison to if they just see a picture or a photo of the patient that's appended to the radiographic record, they write like 23% longer reports, and it increases their diagnostic accuracy by 40%. So even in little ways like that, we just have to find shortcuts to bring the humanity of why we do what we do back into the work, essentially.
So Tom, I'm going to hold it back up, but I said that it's an assessment, it's a guide, and then it's also individualized. You had set this up to do the assessment, and I want to make sure that we cover that, because I like the way you include the assessment. There's a code. If I scratch off my little sort of lottery ticket on the back pages and I get the code, I can go and take the assessment on Contribify. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that's all about?
Yeah, I've learned with all the books I've worked on that if you just give someone a nonfiction book today, where it's in the world where it's a lot easier to hit play on the next Netflix show or whatever, it's really not that likely to take hold and help people to change behavior and apply what they learn. So with this book, like a lot of others I've worked on, we put together a website where people can scratch off that code and put it in there, 2 of them with each book. So you can do it with a friend or a colleague and have the conversation, which I would recommend. And as you go through, it asks you, what are the big roles you play in life? So for me, it'd be being a dad and a husband and a researcher. And it asks me about my strengths. And it asks me questions about what have been the most influential life experiences that have shaped who you are and why you do what you do. And so you plug those things in and then go through an exercise of 50 multiple choice questions where you're prioritizing how you want to contribute to the team that you're on today. So you kind of go through that exercise. And then at the end, it spits out a real detailed report that's 5, 10 pages with recommendations. But most importantly, it gives you kind of a 1-page baseball card that says, here's who I am. Here's how I want to contribute to this effort. Here are my strengths. Here are the top contributions where I can do the most for a given group. And we put that together because I think so many times we get a group of 3, 5, 10 people together, and we usually bring people together because they're kind of like-minded, have similar interests, and then we all just say, let's go, and we hit the ground running. And it takes 6 or 12 months before we have to come back and realize that we were all running in the same direction, doing the same things, even though we had great intentions. And we didn't sit around a table and say, here's what I think I can do best, and here's what I agree to do, and here's my background, to get to know each other better. So my greatest hope with that Contribify website and exercise is that people use it to take inventory for themselves, but then use it as a team exercise before they form a new team to think about how they achieve their goals and set priorities and the like. And I also just hope it's a little bit more of a human and personal version of getting to know people than what you see in a resume right now. The current resume and cover letter couldn't be any more sterile and transactional if we tried to script it that way. So I think if we can start off getting to know people in a work setting by saying, here's who I am as a person, here's what's influenced my life, here are my strengths, it should kind of smooth the road for much faster growth.
Well, you essentially say, what are you trying to achieve? And then here's a bit of a roadmap to get you there personally, not just professionally, but personally. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I like the way, though, that it does the assessment and then gives you the instant feedback, and you can use that. You should use that as your guide. So I went from assessment to guide, but what I said earlier about strengths and how you took, well, let's not focus as much on your weaknesses. Let's talk about the strengths. You did that in this book in a different way. You said that, that this assessment and book seemed to match motivators and abilities to purpose with what the world needs from you, not just follow your passion. Oh my goodness, so many students, so many people over the years have been told, follow your passion, do what you love, right? Well,
Right.
you hope you're going to be doing what you love, but if you're following your passion as opposed to what you're good at for what the world needs, you may be missing the mark. Can you just expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, it's a good thought because I was talking recently with my friend Dan Pink, who's an author that lives here in the DC area, and we were going back and forth about the follow your passion advice. And I said to him, and he quickly jumped on the part that, essentially, if you're telling people to follow their passion, you're saying, do whatever you want and assume the rest of the world will kind of come in line and follow around you and start to revolve in your orbit. And as nice as that would be, that's not the way the world works, as all of us have figured out the hard way as we get out there. So, and essentially, being a team from a very well-known and respected business school here, um, I think you'd appreciate it. I've always looked at this kind of like a supply and demand equation where your talents are the supply and capacity that you have over here. And on the other side is the demand side, which is what the world needs. And if you just keep charging forward with supply of the product that you enjoy making the most, if there's no demand for that, you're not going to have a successful enterprise that makes money, let alone has a big influence on the world, right? So I think that's where we've got to think more strategically about our natural talents, which StrengthsFinder measures brilliantly, and then what motivates us, what we're interested in, and then how can we start to connect those dots with what our families need, what our organizations need, what the communities around us need, and make sure that what we're doing to apply our talents has the most utility for other people going forward. Because I talk about this a lot in the book, but my observation and personal learning, at least, has been that if you can even spend an hour today working on something that another person may benefit from, whether that's an hour of conversation or mentoring, whether that's an article you write and put together that people read, or whether it's a big business or project you work on that people benefit from for the next 50 years, those are things that I think we take more satisfaction in. And it really helps to shape our days, even if you can just get an hour on that each day. It doesn't have to be all your time every day.
So I'm now in about 50 pages in, and we're going to talk about the 12 contributions for the contributors, but contributions. And then what I like to do is to spend the balance on what you did on the next 100 pages. We don't have to go through page by page or even chapter by chapter, but here are the contributions. It's operate, create, and relate. Under operate, it's organizing, achieving, adapting, scaling. Under create, it's initiating, challenging, teaching, visioning. Under relate, it's connecting, energizing, perceiving, and influencing. Now, when you come up with these contributions, you then spend some great time, which I really think is the heart of the book. For each of the 12, you explain what it is. You explain how you can best contribute to teams. You then go on to explain how you can best contribute to others' lives. And then you talk about how to develop the energy to be your best. It's incredibly thorough for each of those 12. And I'd like to spend just a bit of time focusing on teams, because you didn't talk about the individual. You didn't talk about me and my job and my role, but in fact, it was talking about contributing to teams, contributing to other people's lives, the essence of life's great question. Can you spend a bit about why you focus so much time and attention on teams?
Yeah, the kind of, as we were launching this book, Amazon called us up and asked if we'd do a separate short book that's Kindle only with them. And it was kind of a compendium to this, and it was just the essential message without all the tools and application. And the title of that book is "It's Not About You." And when we wrote it in December of 2019, not knowing what was coming. But that encapsulates what I've learned about the best way to contribute and serve is the more you can get into the "it's not about you" mindset, it gets you out of your own headspace. And honestly, the thing I learned that was refreshing personally is it's just a lot less stressful when you orient more of your time in the direction of others and how you can improve their lives. So that's why in these sections, we started by focusing on that team level. And before I get into any of the more detailed contributions, essentially what I did was we went back and looked at all of the different job descriptions the Bureau of Labor Statistics has in their big database here in the US, and kind of tried to code that down to what are the 50 or 100 things that people actually do. So teaching a group of people or selling a product or service. And we went through all those different pieces and said, if you'd had to boil down these contributions, could you boil them down to 10 or 15 or 20? And we finally got down to those 12 kind of more detailed contributions about what people can do on a team. But then even those 12 are kind of too much to get your head around if you've got a team of 3 people and you're trying to get something done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I try to distill it and simplify it even more and say, no matter what type of team you've assembled, or there's some things that every single team arguably needs to do. And that's what gets into every single team needs to create something. So you have to have a product or service, or I don't really know what you're doing as a team, or some mission. And you need to have relationships with one another, and you need to know each other and get along and energize each other and so forth. And then you need to operate and scale and execute and get stuff done. So I think even if you don't read the book, you don't go through the inventory or profile or take much more away from this. If any team that you have, if you can just sit down as a group and say, we've got to create, we've got to operate, and we've got to relate to one another, and who's going to be responsible for making sure we at least do those 3 things, that's a big head start on where most teams begin, in my experience. Even senior executive and leadership teams, boy, they never sit down and say, how do we make sure we have good relationships with one another over the next 3 years? It doesn't happen very often. So I think that's the big starting point to say, let's look at the health of the team first, and then how each person can add to that.
So I'll go back on the assessment, because the assessment begins with knowing yourself and then how you contribute to the team. It's not telling you to direct the team. It's not even forming the team. It's talking about you. And then if you can take those strengths, if you can take what you can contribute, then go find some other teammates to round things out, create that sort of number of 12, but certainly the 3 main elements. And again, not go through each one, but I was struck by the first under creating, called initiating. How do we get started? Nice place to go, but you capture it in this paragraph. It says, initiating new efforts between people is what makes any team or group work. If you are motivated by connecting people with one another, you're one of the most valuable hubs of any social network. This can help motivate you to initiate new conversations, share more information, and bring groups together with a common purpose. And then you go through chapter by chapter. This is exactly how you've done it. Each of those 12, you talk about contributing to the teams, contributing to others' lives, the energy to be your best, and then you go right on to the next topic. And I think that that consistency lets you get your head around the fact that if I did the assessment and I figured out a little bit what I'm bringing to the table, I can focus my attention there, but not just exclusive. I should know all 12, because that way I'll be a good team member. I'll understand what are the strengths people will be looking for as well.
Yeah, and that's the important part, I think, is as you're able at first to say we need people doing these three things, and then to get into the more detailed categories as well. Because, I mean, just to share a personal anecdote with you, I'm really good at initiating and getting new projects started, but without the right people around me, those fires would just sit there burning until they fizzle and really not get executed into something real. And I'm also not the one to bring some of those relational pieces. And so if you sit down and do that up front and kind of explicitly say, here's the person who's going to help us to stay connected and communicating often. Here's the person who's going to energize things. Here's the person who's going to help us to operate and make sure that we get things done at a level of quality. It's knowing how you can depend on someone else. And I think it's also important to point out, I'm not going to get to use my favorite strengths or where I want to contribute every time. A lot of that can be a negotiation, because you need to make sure you're filling in those core areas if you want to have an effective team and then build and scale and do as much as you can for the communities that you serve. But I think I liked what you said about it's important to come back to you're kind of the independent variable here, but the dependent variable is a good and effective team and what you're contributing back to the community essentially.
And so now you're talking essentially about life's great question, not where you fit in on things, but how you can make a meaningful contribution to things, to other people's lives, to your team, to community broadly. Can you sort of spend a little bit of time expanding on who you will make contributions to? And then maybe it's just dependent upon who you want to make a contribution to.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, especially for people who are early career or entering the workforce, is um, to know that obviously a paycheck matters, and all the work I've done on well-being around the world would suggest that if you're worried about being able to pay rent, if you're worried about putting food on the table, shelter, some of these basic things, it's really hard to see past that and have much mind space. And so some of these conversations are not as relevant about how you see your bigger mission and contribution to the world. But as soon as you get to that point of some sufficiency, um, well, you can keep doubling your income as much as you want. It's not going to improve your daily happiness much, if at all. What improves your happiness more once you reach that point of sufficiency and not having stress overwhelm you is seeing how you make a difference and having good quality relationships in particular and being a part of a community. So that's where I would really challenge people to say, as fast as you can in your career, to push beyond that paycheck. And it's pretty encouraging what I've seen that people I've interviewed entering the workforce today, they do have higher expectations. They're less likely to want to go work for a tobacco company or someone that produces products that arguably do a net harm for society. They might not even want to go work for a social networking company, depending on their beliefs. They want to work for an organization that makes a difference. So it's been good to see that trend of people entering the workforce today who some would argue have real high expectations. I would argue have better and stronger expectations that may be more sustainable for the next 25, 50 years.
So I'm going to go through a couple more questions, but I'd also like to open it up to the audience. If they have any questions, please submit them through chat. You talked about replacing the resume, or maybe that the resume is not a piece of paper or now electronic that really shares who you are and what you can contribute. It's a pretty dry document typically, and it's nothing associated with the passions that you're talking about and the contributions. I would like to spend, as we just went through, those different elements of contributing to others, contributing to the team. It's this energy to be your best. So in the book, you talk about diet, you talk about eating vegetables, you talk about a level of exercise, depending upon the contribution, the sleep, and all of the rest. Why did you go down that path, and how important is it to you that people take that to heart?
I think it's the most important piece. I'm glad you asked about it, Jim, because before this book, the last two books I worked on, one was called Eat, Move, Sleep. That's the one that we launched a documentary around at AU, and then a book called Fully Charged. And what we found, and a lot of this was in conjunction with working with the Surgeon General of the Army nearby here, is that it's the same thing applies in the workplace, it applies in the battlefield. And the Army's former Surgeon General, Patty Arojo, talks about the way if troops in the battlefield don't get enough sleep, they don't have the ammunition they need for their brain when they need it on the battlefield in Afghanistan and Iraq and the like. And I've seen this time and time again with leaders where leaders and organizations are the first ones to sacrifice their own sleep. They're the first ones to eat lunch over their keyboard and get crumbs all over. And they're the first ones to just sit at desks and sit through long meetings all day and not be moving around and the like. And the big problem there is, to really oversimplify a lot of research I've looked at, I think organizations are the single biggest impediment to people's well-being in our society today. That being said, they're also the one place where we have the most opportunity for growth, because they're the social networks that we spend the most time in during normal times. And so those social networks can be harnessed to create a lot of well-being and do a lot of good. But if you're working for a company where the role model and expectation being set by top leaders in that organization is that you should work around the clock, burn yourself out, vacations aren't encouraged, if not even accepted in some cases, and they're not thinking about people having the mental timeshare and attention and space that they need, and you're not thinking about helping people to eat better and be more active throughout the day. If leaders are being poor role models there, it does not matter how good your wellness or benefits program that your HR department's working on is panning out, because people follow that example from the top. And I think we've all seen, especially during these times with organizational and global leaders, where boy, does modeling make a bigger difference than even I would have guessed when I wrote this book a year ago. And so if you aspire to manage or lead or have an influence on other people, I think you owe it to them to be a good example yourself and make sure that you have the energy to be your best every day. I've spent a lot of time with not only organizational leaders, but groups like hospice nurses and teachers around here in the area. And all these groups that I frankly admire most in the fabric of our society, they're also some of the very first people to put everyone else's needs ahead of their own. But what I've looked at research-wise would suggest it's actually like the old tried but true oxygen mask example, where if you don't put your mask on first and take care of yourself, the people you're caring for won't get your best efforts, and they won't feel like they have the permission to do it themselves either. So that, I think that's kind of a bigger problem and epidemic underlying a lot of things in the workforce today than it gets credit for.
We're going to go to questions in a minute. I'm going to ask, though, how would Life's Great Question, this book, get framed if we were, let's say, in a global pandemic?
We tried to release this about a week before everything shut down. It's changed about everything. I think we'll probably try and relaunch it sometime here. But I would, I might even frame it more as it's interesting. I mentioned the book, It's Not About You, that was kind of a parallel book with Amazon at the same time. I would have called this book, It's Not About You, had I seen this coming, but I didn't have the courage to call a business book It's Not About You, because I'm also a publisher in another part of my career. And I know that no manager is going to put that on someone's desk unless it's accompanied by a pink slip, right?
You go.
Or essentially calling somebody selfish if you give that one out. So I would get more focused on the root there about how we're all in this together. This is a big collective challenge. It has the opportunity to bring us together to do a lot of good for society. And it's even more important now than ever. And what's been encouraging, Jim, is that I have seen more and more people over the last 6-12 months stepping back and saying, not only why do I do what I do and is it the right thing, but am I doing things in the right way? Am I doing things in a way that allows me to be healthy? Am I doing things in a way that allows me to pay attention to my kids when they're looking at me at 6 o'clock in the evening? And I think we're all reevaluating the way we work and the relationship we have with the organizations we've chosen to be a part of. And I'm kind of optimistic that's going to bring a lot of good to our society 3 to 5 years from now. We'll see how it plays out.
A couple of questions, and one comes up about how can I contribute in my workplace if I'm brand new to it?
I think if you're brand new to a workplace, it's a pretty good time to broaden your perspective and take a look at not just what was stated. And, I took a pot shot at resumes for being too sterile, but I would also take a shot at job descriptions are probably worse. So I would say no one should feel encumbered by the bullet points on a job description when they start. And if you have a manager who's worth even a few ounces of management talent, that person, she will want you to figure out how you uniquely do what you do best to achieve what the organization needs from you. And I think when you're starting an organization, it's a great time to step back and say, given who you are, your motivations, your talents, all things we've talked about, how can you perform this job uniquely, even if it's very different from the 5 people who would sit next to you on a Zoom screen or in a cubicle farm and at a normal time there, and to really reevaluate that. The other thing I would encourage people to do is if you have joined an organization that you believe in and you think the organization has a mission that you're proud of, don't give up too quick on the organization or the job, because one, there might be ways to reconfigure your job and craft it to make a difference. And two, there might be a lot of other jobs and things that you can do within that same organization without just giving up on it and hopping around to different organizations as frequently as people have tended to do in the last 5 years.
We're going to talk a little bit about the chapter on adapting. This is under operating, how quickly we can adapt to changes. And now I'm going back to the pandemic, but when you look at the people that you want on your team, or that you now want to step up and play more of a leadership role in this pandemic and into the future, 6 months, a year, even further, what will people be looking for in terms of the contributions that people can make? What are the, I'll go with a mix, what are the strengths of the assessment in life's great question that people will be looking for, that will be more adaptable to this incredible change going on?
It's a really good question. When I step back and think about it a little bit, it seems to me that teams ideally should be formed with forethought about bringing as much diversity to the group as possible. And I'm talking about diversity of race, I'm talking about diversity of gender, I'm talking about diversity of age. I'm also talking about diversity of talent. And diversity of talents, meaning right now, when we pull teams together, whether it's in the workplace or in our personal lives or with a community group, we tend to bring together like-minded people who, even if they don't look like us and act like us, they think like us and have similar interests. And I think we need to be more intentional to say, let's bring people together who have very different talents, dissenting viewpoints, very different backgrounds, come from very different neighborhoods and circumstances. And the more diversity in terms of thought and talent and actual composition, I think the better off that we'll be over time. And the other thing I'll point out is, if I look back at the research that I was a part of for the book Strengths-Based Leadership, the one place where executive teams were most commonly devoid of talent was really in that relationship domain and area. And, you get these leadership teams where people to work their way up the ranks because they were good operators, good with execution. They've worked their way up the ranks because they were really good at selling. Those were the most common ones. But nobody had really worked their way into the very top ranks who was good at building, maintaining, and energizing relationships. And a part of that was just the lack of gender diversity on these teams that I would attribute to that as well. But I think that if you can contribute to helping people to be more cohesive and have better relationships, that would be the one secret weapon that most teams need more of, if I had to point out one.
And then as you look at the different elements of what people can contribute to a team, what they can contribute as it relates to their own workplace, I'd like to raise it up a bit higher and talk about the community in large. When you talk about how you can contribute to the community, what do you mean?
Yeah, I think ideally we should all be able to, when we meet that person at the cocktail party and they ask you about how you help or what you do, you should be able to point to something that is really making a difference for at least one other human being, if not a group or a whole community worth of people, in terms of saying, here's exactly what I do that provides food for people in need in this part of Alexandria. Or here's what I do that helps people to be less stressed about their finances with my advisory services. And to be able to not write some of those sentences so it's real handy and you can share that with strangers or with colleagues or with friends. But I mean, it's also a good way to, I mean, if I were to look around our peer group of parents of kids around here in our school system, I could kind of tell you who's an attorney and I could tell you who's a doctor, but I'd really like to know more about how they think they're contributing and how they help. And I think one way to do that is to really try and get under the surface in some of your conversations with people in the future. Because if you ask good questions about that, boy, it'll lead to a meaningful interaction with someone if you can do a little bit of that. One of the things I've learned in the last year or two here of talking with people, especially through the pandemic, is I think one of the most valuable leadership contributions that any of us can make into the future is to sit down one-on-one with another person who we care about or we're trying to mentor in the workplace, and to ask a few good questions and keep all of our devices and dingers and buzzers turned off and stowed away in our pockets, close our own mouths as long as we possibly can, and to genuinely listen to those responses and those questions. And I think if you can get really good at doing that and learning about how other people contribute and what makes them tick and what they're doing, that's really the best pathway to learning on your own as well.
Now, that's coming from a self-avowed introvert. And you have an introductory part of this book that talks about pushing yourself out of the comfort zone to becoming more of an extrovert, to sit down with somebody and ask them probing questions like that, to subject yourself to those types of probing questions. I'm always taken by the fact that it's that the introvert should be pushed to be more of an extrovert as opposed to the extrovert being pushed to be more of an introvert. Quiet down and listen a little bit more. But when you do push yourself out of the comfort zone, and I think it's an essential element of this book about pushing yourself, this isn't saying bring what you have to the table. It's understanding, like you say, what society needs and how can you meet that need with your strengths, with your passion, with your abilities. But spend a little bit of time talking about pushing your own self, not just you, but one's self out of their comfort zone and what's the upside.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think one of the misnomers of some of the strengths work has been that it essentially just says go focus on your strengths and ignore your weaknesses and just be more of who you are, independent of what society needs and values and so forth. When in reality, what's most important there is that you're saying spend most of your time trying to be more of who you are, but you had a great example there where I'm really introverted, and if I just had it my own way, I'd spend all my time kind of going through research and spreadsheets and maybe put some books together and set them over here on the table, and then I'd move right on to the next book and the next topic. But I mentioned my friend Dan Pink earlier on, who's written a lot of influential books, and he once said to me, he said, if you really believe in your ideas and what you're writing, you owe it to yourself to see the day the book launches like an Iowa primary where you have to spend another 2 years going out and talking about it and pushing it. And it's all you talk about for the next years. Otherwise, what you've spent all this time working on won't really have an influence or see the light of day. And that was really valuable advice from Dan for me. And it helped me to step back and realize that there are areas where if you want to accomplish the mission and make the contribution that a lot of us hope to have in different areas, that you do need to both stretch yourself outside your comfort zone. And then most importantly, I've learned is find some partners who you can work with that can do some of those pieces even better than you could.
Right. You don't have to do it all yourself. If you
Right.
put it up appropriately, then you can really accomplish a great deal more.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, my final comment here is that one of the critiques of the quote, follow your passion advice is that it presumes you are at the center of the world and pursuing your own joy, not the service of others, is the objective. I have found that those who leave a lasting mark on the world, in contrast, are always asking what they can give. And my question to you is that life's great question?
Yes. Well, I think a lot of the book, it starts off on the front flap with that Dr. King quote of life's most persistent and urgent question is, What are you doing for others? And I would encourage anyone to write that on their whiteboard, put it on a little post-it note, stick it in the back of their head, and try and ask that each and every day. Because if you can spend even 10 or 15 minutes asking a good question to someone, listening to them, writing something that someone appreciates or recognizes, or if you're working in retail, for example, if you can take one customer who walks into your store or calls into your call center frustrated and turn them around, even get them to neutral, it totally changes the course of their day. But you need to step back in your day or at the end of the day and recognize that you did something that made a contribution for another person that day. And if you could start piling up day after day with one of those each day, it's going to lead to a lot of positive energy, a lot of satisfaction, a lot of success, a lot of meaning you're injecting into your community, and a lot of collective well-being, not just for yourself, but for others over time based on what I've studied.
Well, and Tom, when other people say that from lots of different backgrounds, it doesn't come across with the seriousness with which you approach it, with the background, with the study and the surveys and the body of work that you have. And on behalf of the Kogod School of Business and American University, I'd just like to thank you for this great work. I'd like you to thank you for spending the afternoon with us discussing it. I wish you all of the continued success that it continues to climb the charts at Amazon and independent bookstores like Politics and Prose and elsewhere. But I have to say that when you say it and you write it, it is the voice of experience. It is your life's work, and you were sharing that with all of us. And I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you, Jim. And I'd like to thank everyone that joined us today for their time and investing an hour or so in their learning today. I appreciate it a lot.
Best wishes for the holidays, best wishes for the new year, and I hope the pandemic clears and we get to sit face to face very soon.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I'm going to go back to you and thank you for arranging all of this. Yep, Elizabeth, you're going to have to unmute yourself.
We thank you for attending our event today. Our event is now coming to an end. We look forward to seeing you at other conversations with upcoming people, notable people within the community, speaking about topics that Kogod is very much interested in. We actually have a great day, and thank you, everyone.